I used to believe I'd seen the ugliest sides of people. Life never exactly handed me warm-hearted folks on a silver platter. I grew up in a neighborhood where kindness was a rare currency, and survival meant wearing armor every single day. But even with all the hurt I'd weathered, nothing, absolutely nothing, could have braced me for what happened that Thanksgiving. We had just barely sat down to dinner, maybe 10 seconds in, when I noticed it. My son Eli, only 8 years old, his dark curls freshly combed, sat stiffly at the far end of the long mahogany dining table. He wore a crisp white shirt with the collar buttoned up tight like he was trying to look extra grown up for the occasion. His small feet, clad in shiny black dress shoes, didn't reach the floor and swung gently beneath the seat. I watched his eyes bounce nervously across the table. Maybe he was checking if his manners were good enough, or if he was sitting too far from me. But something didn't sit right. Everyone else had matching porcelain plates with gold-trim polished silverware, elegant cloth napkins folded just so, and dishes piled with turkey stuffing and cranberry relish. It looked like a scene lifted from a lifestyle magazine, except for Eli. In front of my child was a silver bowl, not a plate, a literal stainless steel dog bowl, and inside dry kibble, dog food, real dog food. I blinked, my mind struggling to make sense of it. Maybe it was a bad joke. Maybe one of the kids thought they were being funny. Maybe I was imagining things. But then my eyes caught her, Margot Whitmore, my mother-in-law. Andrew's mother. Eli's supposed grandmother, if you could even stomach calling her that. She sat directly across the table from me, one hand cradling an expensive crystal wine glass, the other resting elegantly in her lap. Her lipstick was pristine. Her hair was in a flawless French twist. The string of pearls around her neck didn't move when she spoke, and with the kind of voice one might use to comment on the weather, she said, "A child from the slums doesn't need a feast." Just like that, as if she were discussing a movie. No guilt, no hesitation, no shame. Eli froze. His shoulders tensed up. His head tilted slightly as he looked down at the dog bowl in front of him. He didn't cry, didn't even say a word, but I saw it. The quiver in his lower lip, the way his eyes glazed just a bit too fast. How he clenched his little fists in his lap. He was trying to stay composed. He didn't want to make a scene. That's the kind of boy he is, quiet strength. Gentle spirit. He bottles up his pain so it won't burden anyone else. My heart dropped like a stone. The entire room went still. Forks were midair, no one spoke. Across the table, Andrew's brother James shifted awkwardly, glancing at his wife Caroline, who stared down into her lap like she'd just remembered something she needed to forget. And Andrew, my husband, he didn't look up. He just stared at the butter dish like it held all the answers in the world. He said nothing, not a word, like he always did when his mother lobbed those quiet grenades. No one stood up, no one called her out. It was like time had paused to hold its breath, waiting for my next move. Inside me, a storm raged. Every version of me collided, the girl from the tough part of town who'd learned to raise her fists before her voice. The woman who'd clawed her way into a stable life, the mother who'd sworn her son would never be made to feel like less. I could feel heat in my chest, my fingers itching to flip the whole table. But I didn't scream. I didn't throw wine in anyone's face like some TV drama character. Instead, I stood up, calm, grounded, deliberate. I walked the length of the table to where Eli sat. He looked up at me with wide eyes, searching for my reaction. I knelt beside him, took his small, clammy hand in mine. He gave me a tiny squeeze, just enough to say he needed me. I looked up at Margot, right into those ice blue eyes of hers, and I didn't say a thing. I didn't need to. Then I turned around, my hand still wrapped around Eli's. We walked past the untouched roast turkey, past the sparkling chandeliers, past the marble staircase she always bragged about. We stepped through the massive front door of the Whitmore estate, out into the crisp autumn air, and got in the car. I drove away, still silent, trying to keep the shaking in my hands from transferring to the steering wheel. Eli sat beside me, quiet as ever, his gaze locked on the passenger side window. I could see his little reflection in the glass, his brow furrowed, his fists clenched. I reached over and gently brushed a stray curl off his forehead. His voice broke the silence, barely a whisper. "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" I nearly crashed the car right there. That one question, it cracked something deep in me. I choked back the knot rising in my throat and swallowed hard. No, baby, I told him. You did everything right. Some people just... they don't know how to treat others with kindness. And that's not your fault. But what I didn't tell him, what I couldn't bring myself to say in that moment, was that this wasn't the first time Margot had tried to make me feel small. That Andrew's silence wasn't new. That for far too long I'd let it slide. I'd tried to smooth it over, keep the peace, pretend it was all just part of blending two worlds together. But this time she came for my son. And that was the last mistake Margot Whitmore would ever make. The next morning, while Eli was still asleep, she showed up at my door. Pale, shaken, rattled in a way I had never seen before. But the woman she expected to beg for reconciliation, to keep the peace for the sake of family, wasn't there anymore. That woman, the one who'd walked into Margot's dining room hoping to be seen to be accepted, was gone. Because here's the thing about marrying into money. No matter how many silk drapes you hang in your living room, no matter how many imported cheeses you learn to pronounce, no matter how well you fold the napkins for brunch, they never let you forget where you came from, even if you try to forget it yourself. My name is Rachel Bennett. I grew up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a part of Philadelphia where people double-checked their locks at night. My mom pulled double shifts at the local diner, and we relied on food stamps and donated jackets during the winter. But our home was filled with warmth, loud laughter, and the kind of love that made you feel full, even when your plate wasn't. Then I met Andrew. And he seemed different, at least that's what I told myself. He had this quiet, unassuming charm. He listened, really listened. He never winced when I talked about my past, or the fact that Eli came from a relationship that didn't last. If anything, he embraced it, said being part of our life was an honor. That made me believe. We got married 2 years later. It was small, intimate, just us, Eli, and a handful of friends. No fanfare, no spectacle. But when his family came into the picture, that's when the chill started creeping in. Margot Whitmore was not just cold, she was sculpted from frost. Everything about her, her voice, her gaze, her silence was sharp enough to cut. And from day one, she made it clear I didn't belong. Never directly, that wasn't her style. No, it came in comments and glances and pauses that lasted just a second too long. Oh, you didn't grow up with formal dinners, that must have been different. This wine might be a bit strong for someone who didn't attend debutante balls. I assume Eli's father isn't in the picture? That must have been challenging. The word challenging from her lips sounded like an insult wrapped in silk. At first, I did what I thought all good women did. I softened myself. I tried in every way I could think of to ease the tension that wrapped itself around Margot Whitmore, like a designer shawl, suffocating yet elegant. I brought homemade cookies to her manicured brunches, the kind rolled out on flour-dusted counters by Eli's small hands glazed with too much icing, but full of heart. I complimented her interior decor, her centerpieces, the way she folded napkins into swans, as if each meal were being served to royalty. I offered to help in the kitchen, though my hands were always directed toward the least consequential tasks: washing lettuce, organizing cutlery, arranging chairs in dead straight rows for parties that never felt like celebrations. Once she handed me a pile of her guest towels, not to fold, but to press, and I did so, carefully, one crease at a time, not because I wanted her approval, but because I foolishly believed kindness might coax humanity out of her. It never did. And Eli, sweet, trusting Eli, he tried even harder. He'd draw her elaborate crayon pictures with rainbow skies and stick figure families that always included her hand, her dandelions plucked from the cracks in our driveway, with a grin that made my heart swell. Once he wrapped an old string around a bundle of lilacs from our backyard, tied it with pride, and said, "This is for you, Grandma Margot." She blinked slow and cold, and smiled like the gesture had offended her. "Oh, sweetie," she said in her syrupy tone, "let's stick to just Margot. Grandma makes me sound old." He never used that word again, not for her. Still, I kept showing up. Every holiday, every birthday, every meticulously planned family dinner. I arrived with a smile stitched tightly across my face, no matter how raw I felt inside. I swallowed her jabs like dry pills, unpleasant, bitter, necessary. Not for Margot. Not even for Andrew, who by then had mastered the art of passive presence. I did it for Eli, because I wanted him to feel like he had a family that stretched beyond just the two of us. I wanted him to believe, even if I couldn't, that he belonged. And somewhere deep down, nestled in the foolish optimism that refuses to die in women like me, I hoped that if I smiled enough, gave enough, loved enough, Margot would finally see us not as charity cases, but as family. But Margot never stopped auditioning us, and we never passed. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I had almost convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. Andrew had started to quietly interject when the comments turned sharp, offering to leave early when he noticed me stiffening at the table. He'd place a hand on my back during the more stilted gatherings, and I let myself believe that was progress. That morning, we even got to the Whitmore estate early to help with the setup. Margot greeted us with a nod, her tone faintly warmer than usual, less steel, more linen. It wasn't affection, but it wasn't venom either. I let myself feel hopeful. Eli wore the navy blazer with gold buttons I'd bought for the occasion. He looked like a miniature gentleman, his curls combed and slicked, his shoes shined by his own tiny hands. He clutched the pumpkin pie we'd baked the night before, careful not to tilt the dish as he stepped out of the car. "Can I carry it all the way to the table?" Mom he'd asked, eyes wide with pride. "Of course, sweetheart," I'd replied. "You're in charge of dessert today." His face lit up as though he were walking into a fairy tale. And in a way, I suppose he was. Just not the kind with a happy ending. Inside the house smelled like something out of a magazine, rosemary and roasted garlic, the faint sweetness of baked apples and brown sugar. Classical music murmured from the sound system. Gold-rimmed chargers sat beneath each porcelain plate, and the name cards were handwritten in perfect calligraphy. Margot moved with effortless grace, her pale pink sweater set pristine, a snowflake brooch glittering against her collar like frost. She kissed Andrew on the cheek, and to me offered a glance, a nod that barely qualified as acknowledgement. When she saw Eli, she said, "Well, look at you," and then turned away before he could reply. The boy who'd dressed up to be seen didn't even get a full sentence. We helped finish setting the table. At least I did. Andrew followed his mother's lead, fiddling with napkin placement, pouring wine into goblets she handed him. I noticed that his voice was quieter than usual, his gaze avoiding mine. Still, I tried not to let it unravel me. I reminded myself that things were improving, that maybe this holiday would be different. Margot called us to the dining room. She sat at the head of the table, of course, her posture regal and unbending. Andrew took the seat beside her. Across the table, James and Caroline were already laughing lightly about some charity fundraiser they'd attended. I scanned the table, looking for Eli's name card, expecting it near mine. But I didn't find it, not until I noticed something unusual near the far end, just off the main arrangement, like an afterthought. I stepped closer and my stomach lurched. There was no porcelain plate, no silverware, no napkin, no gold trim. Just a silver bowl. A dog bowl. Inside it, brown lumps of kibble. Real dog food. For a moment the room spun. My brain refused to compute it, as though this couldn't possibly be happening. Not here, not now, not to him. Then I heard Eli's voice behind me, tentative but excited. "Is this my spot?" He peered over my shoulder, his little face hopeful. And then he saw it. The hope shattered instantly. His smile dissolved, his eyes dimmed. Before I could form words, Margot spoke. Her voice rang out across the table like a bell, loud, clear, proud. "A child from the slums doesn't need a feast." She had rehearsed it. I could hear it in the cadence, the satisfaction curling behind her teeth. Each word struck like a lash across my son's spirit. Eli didn't cry. He just stared. His expression froze. I watched the light retreat from his eyes, the confusion twisting into something darker, a quiet, invisible wound. His lip trembled as he bit down on it, holding everything in, like always. I saw it then, his internal retreat. A fortress going up inside him. A small boy learning too soon how to shut out pain by shutting off. And no one said a word. Andrew didn't even look up. Caroline sipped her wine with the delicacy of someone pretending to be somewhere else. James cleared his throat and looked at his watch. Even the family dog by the hearth lifted its head, sensing the shift. I wanted to scream, to throw my chair across the room, to shout, "What kind of person does this to a child?" But Eli was watching, and I couldn't let him see me unravel, so I chose something else. I walked over to his chair. I knelt. I took his hand, still trembling, still trying not to cry, and I met his eyes. "Let's go," I whispered. He nodded. His hand slid into mine with quiet trust. Together we walked slowly, purposefully out of that immaculate room, past the untouched food, past the stunned silence, past the curated illusions of grace and tradition. No one stopped us. Margot didn't say a thing. Maybe she thought she had won. But what she could never have imagined, what no one sitting smugly in that curated dining room understood, was that I wasn't walking away in shame. I wasn't crumbling. I wasn't defeated. I was leaving to protect the only soul who ever truly mattered in my world. Eli, my son, my heart. We got into the car, the silence inside it pressing against my skin like static. My fingers trembled as I turned the ignition. The engine roared, but my breath wouldn't come. The tightness in my chest was unbearable. My hands clenched the wheel, white-knuckled. Still, I said nothing. Neither did Eli. The boy who had just been publicly humiliated sat beside me in stunned stillness, his face turned toward the window, his reflection ghost-like in the cold glass. For a long time we drove in silence, the hum of the tires, the only sound as my mind screamed. Then softly, so softly I almost didn't hear it, he whispered, "Did I embarrass you?" The words hit me harder than any slap could. My throat seized tears, stinging the corners of my eyes. I slammed on the brakes not of the car, but of my emotions before they crashed out of me and swallowed the boy who needed reassurance more than anything. I turned toward him, eyes burning, heart aching. "No, baby," I said, voice low but resolute. "You are the only person in that house who made me proud today." And I meant it. Every syllable, every breath between the words. Because in that singular moment, as I stared into his two wise eyes, I realized just how long I had been shrinking. Years of walking on eggshells, of carefully measured smiles, of diluted truths. I had twisted myself into knots trying to maintain a fragile peace with a woman who didn't see us as people, just imperfections on her perfect white linen life. That night, Eli fell asleep with his head in my lap, his breath slow and steady, his tiny body curled into me like he had when he was a toddler. I sat there stroking his hair with one hand, the remote in the other, clicking through channels without seeing a thing. The television flickered in front of me, meaningless noise against the roar of my thoughts. My body sat still on the couch, but inside my mind was a battlefield. I kept replaying it. Margot's smug expression, the way her lips curled around cruelty. That polished dog bowl glinting under the chandelier like it belonged there. Andrew's silence carved like stone. The table we left behind remained untouched, food congealing in awkward silence after we were gone. The image haunted me. They say there are moments in life when everything changes. That night was mine. But it didn't come with fireworks or shouting or things thrown across a room. No, this change was quiet. It came like a closing door, soft and final. Something inside me cracked, but instead of shattering, I hardened. It wasn't rage, it was clarity. I had bent so far so long I no longer recognized the shape of myself. And for what to be tolerated at best, ridiculed at worst. To sit at a table where my son, the most beautiful, intelligent, emotionally deep child I have ever known, was forced to question whether he deserved to be there at all. Never again. I gently lifted Eli, carried him to his room, tucked him under his favorite blanket. He didn't stir, not even when I kissed his forehead, and whispered a promise that carried the weight of every bone in my body. "No one will ever make you feel small again. I swear it." Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling. I opened my laptop, unsure what I was even looking for. Lawyers, therapists. A lifeline. I typed in a single sentence, frantic and aching, how to set legal boundaries with in-laws. And suddenly I wasn't just reading, I was researching. Thread after thread, blog after blog, post after post, all written by women like me. Women who had been pushed to their breaking points, who had swallowed poison in the name of peace until they finally couldn't anymore. One comment stopped me cold. "You're not overreacting, you're just finally reacting." It was like someone had reached through the screen and held my hand. I opened a new document. 3 words. 3 declarations of self-worth of war, not the kind waged with weapons, but with will. No more access. No more invitations dressed as obligations. No more smiling while my son is belittled. No more pretending for Andrew's sake. No more sacrificing Eli's dignity for the sake of a last name. I would speak to a lawyer. I would find out what my rights were. I'd even call child services if I had to, just to confirm that I had the authority to decide who got to be in my child's life. Because I didn't want Margot Whitmore anywhere near him. Not again, not ever. And Andrew, he'd have to make a choice. Not in an angry, manipulative way. I wasn't issuing ultimatums. I was drawing a line between truth and consequence. I needed a partner, not a man who played the role of Switzerland while our son's soul was under siege. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I heard the front door creak. Andrew, of course. He'd gone back to his mother's house after dinner, said something vague about trying to calm things down. I didn't ask. I just watched as he stepped into the living room, loosened his tie like he was returning from some routine errand, and sat on the couch's edge, hesitant. I didn't know she was going to do that. He murmured, his eyes searching mine for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding. I didn't speak. She crossed a line, he added after a beat. I told her. I said she's not welcome in our lives anymore. She's done. That surprised me, genuinely. For a moment I studied him, wondering whether this was sincerity or strategy. He looked tired, older than he had hours ago. Regret clung to him like sweat. You should have said that years ago, I replied, my voice low. I know, he whispered, almost childlike. The silence that followed wasn't easy. It wasn't peaceful. It was honest, heavy, unavoidable. He stood slowly, like the weight of what had just passed between us was too much to carry upright. As he turned to leave, I called after him, Andrew. He paused in the hallway. If she shows up here again, she doesn't come in. Not even for a second. I mean it. He nodded once solemn. I understand. Then he disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, into the separate quiet of our bedroom, alone. I remained in the living room another hour, planning my next steps like a general preparing for battle. This wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't even about anger anymore. It was about justice, safety, love with boundaries. Because when someone tries to destroy your child in front of you and smiles while doing it, something ancient awakens in you, not rage, not fear, but resolve. Cold, clear resolve. I thought the worst had passed. But just after dawn, the doorbell rang. I opened the front door to a version of Margot I had never seen. Gone were the pearls, the heels, the perfect posture. Her hair was undone, frizzed at the ends, her lipstick erased. Her hands trembled at her sides. Her eyes, usually so piercing, were dull, frantic. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice frayed like an old threadbare curtain in the wind. She stood there like an apparition stripped of her armor, nothing more than a woman now. No designer coat, no curated smile, just Margot bare. The morning air was bitter. I folded my arms across my chest, letting the chill settle into my skin, grounding me. You can talk, I said flatly, but you're not coming in. That caught her off guard. She blinked, disoriented, clearly not accustomed to being turned away. Then her features shifted, panic, raw and unfamiliar, crawled across her face. I think I ruined everything, she said, the words escaping her in pieces. Garrett. He told me he never wanted to see me again. I said nothing. He's my son, she continued, her voice rising. I didn't think he meant it. He always came back. I pushed him, yes, but he's like his father, soft. She stumbled over her breath, her mouth trembling now. I didn't think, she paused, swallowed hard. He meant it, didn't he? Yes, I said, one word, heavy as stone. Her breath hitched. She sat on the porch bench without waiting for permission, clutching her purse like it held the last of her power. You don't know what it's like, she said almost to herself, to watch your son slip away. I stared at her, this woman who had orchestrated pain with such elegance, and for a fleeting moment I was stunned not by her presence, but by the irony of her words. You don't get to say that, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of finality. Not after what you did to my son. Her eyes glistened, but it wasn't clear if it was guilt that swelled behind them, or merely the desperation of a woman unaccustomed to losing control. She clutched her bag as though it were the last thread tying her to dignity, and with a faltering voice she said, It was meant as a joke. I was making a point. I didn't think he'd take it that way. I didn't think. You didn't think I interrupted, my tone no longer gentle. You placed a bowl of dog food in front of an 8-year-old child, then had the gall to call him a child from the slums. What kind of reaction did you expect? She turned her head away, unable to meet my gaze. Whether she was ashamed or merely calculating, I couldn't tell, and no longer cared. I didn't think it would be cruel, she murmured. I thought... No, I said, slicing through the excuse like a blade. You thought you could humiliate me through him. You thought you could put me in my place one last time. But you didn't break me, Margot. I stepped forward, then letting the stillness of the morning sharpen my presence. You broke your own son's heart, and you lost the last semblance of family you ever had left. The air between us grew thick with silence, the kind that settled heavy in the lungs and refused to lift. When she finally spoke, her words trembled. I thought I was protecting him from women like you. There it was, the venom, finally exposed in the daylight, bitter and ugly, stripped of all its civility and pretenses. I should have felt fury rise in me, but instead all I felt was an overwhelming bone-deep weariness of the games, of the cruelty masquerading as concern, of the endless deciphering of words that were designed to wound without drawing blood. No, I said, breath steady now. You weren't protecting him. You were guarding your illusion of control. You've never seen me for who I am, only what I represent to you, an unwelcome reality. But Andrew doesn't belong to you anymore. And Eli, he's not yours to judge. He is not a symbol of my past. He is a child. I let the silence stretch, then continued, voice gaining strength with each syllable. A child you publicly humiliated. A child you emotionally scarred to assert your superiority. And for what? A sense of power. She flinched finally. Good. I stood taller, anchored now in something immovable. You are not welcome in our home. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not until Eli decides he wants to see you, and when that day comes, you will apologize to him first, not to me. Margot's lips parted in disbelief. You're letting a child decide whether I can be part of your lives? Yes, I said without hesitation, because that child has more emotional maturity than you ever will. She tried to respond, her mouth opening, eyes darting for some comeback, but no words came. She knew it, and so did I. I closed the door on her stunned face, and with that simple act, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to lift. Inside, the air felt warmer, lighter. I moved down the hall past the dim-lit kitchen into Eli's room, where the first glow of dawn peeked through the curtains. He was still asleep, one arm wrapped around his book like a guardian of its magic. His chest rose and fell in a slow, peaceful rhythm that brought tears to my eyes, not of sorrow but of something else entirely. Relief, gratitude, resolve. I sat on the edge of his bed and let the tears come, blinking them away as quietly as I could. For the first time since marrying into the Whitmore family, I no longer felt like a guest in my own life. I was no longer Rachel, the outsider wife, the poor girl with good manners and better intentions. I was Eli's mother, and that title, that truth, it was the only one that had ever mattered. 3 weeks have passed since that Thanksgiving. 3 weeks since Margot appeared on my porch in shambles, stripped of her pearls and posturing. 3 weeks since I drew a line in the sand, and for the first time did not erase it in the name of family or forgiveness. In those weeks I have simply breathed, no longer watching my back for the next sly remark, no longer preparing Eli like he was going into battle with a smile and pressed blazer, just breathing. And Eli, he's changed too. Not in obvious ways, not the kind that the world would see, but I see it. His shoulders are a little less tense, his laughter comes easier. He no longer asks whether the fancy grandma will be at holidays. He doesn't bring crayon drawings to family gatherings or save flowers for someone who never wanted to be his. And yet he hasn't once mentioned the dog bowl, until last night. As I tucked him in, smoothing the blankets around his small frame, he looked up at me, eyes clear and calm. You didn't let her win, he said. I blinked, startled. What do you mean, baby? He shrugged, pulling the blanket to his chin. She tried to make me feel small, but you didn't let her. My throat tightened. I kissed his forehead, turned off the lamp, and left the room before he could see my tears. This time they weren't from pain or fear, but from the astonishing strength of a child who had seen cruelty and still knew the difference between weakness and love. I used to believe protecting your child meant smoothing everything over, preserving the illusion of unity, enduring for the sake of family. But I know better now. Protecting your child sometimes means walking away from traditions that are rooted in harm. Sometimes it means severing blood ties to protect soul ties. Andrew and I have been rebuilding, slowly, painfully, with truth laid bare between us. Some nights we talk until the sun rises. Some nights we speak only with our eyes. I still question whether he has the strength to stay on this side of the line with us. But the difference is, I'm no longer afraid to walk alone if he doesn't. And he's trying. He started therapy, told me he wants to understand why he always froze, why it took watching his mother destroy his son's spirit for him to finally act. I don't need perfection. I need presence, growth, ownership. So I honor his effort. As for Margot, she sent a letter last week. A real letter, handwritten. No defense, no barbed apologies, just an admission that pierced in its honesty. I thought my coldness made me strong. I see now it only made me empty. I hurt Eli. I hurt you. And I don't know if I can ever fix that. But I will stay away until he says otherwise. I understand now. Your silence was strength. I never had that. I haven't responded. I don't know if I ever will. Because I've come to understand something else, something quiet but true. Not every story needs a reconciliation to have a happy ending. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with grand gestures or tearful apologies. It doesn't wear a redemptive glow or come neatly tied with forgiveness. Sometimes it's quieter, subtler. Sometimes healing looks like space. Sometimes closure looks like a door closed gently, but deliberately between you and what used to be. And sometimes the healthiest thing a woman can do is stop rewriting someone else's chapter in her story and start revising her own ending. This year, Eli and I created something new. A tradition of our own, one that required no invitations, no dress code, no strained smiles. On the Saturday after Thanksgiving, while the rest of the world scrolled Black Friday sales or nursed hangovers from indulgence and tension, we spread a blanket on the living room floor, pajamas, slippers, just the two of us, a bowl of reheated mac and cheese between us, and the soft flicker of morning cartoons in the background. No formality, no name cards in calligraphy, no performance. I'm thankful for Mom not letting mean people stay, Eli said through a mouthful of noodles, his eyes bright with a mischievous glint. I smiled, lifting my paper cup of juice in an impromptu toast. Me too, baby. We clinked our cups like royalty in exile, laughing in that weightless, unguarded way that only exists when you've made peace with letting go. He later fetched a book from his backpack, the same one he'd brought to that fateful dinner. He opened The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to the next chapter, and read to me, his small voice steady, halting only now and then on unfamiliar words. I listened, one hand resting on the soft curls at the nape of his neck, and as his words filled the room, I thought about those 4 children, those accidental heroes who had once stumbled through a wardrobe into a world that told them they were small, and yet still found the courage to claim crowns. That's what I want for Eli, not just the bravery to speak, but the unshakable knowing that his voice matters, that his worth is not defined by birthright surnames or seating arrangements at someone else's table. That real family is not built on bloodlines and forced tradition, but on safety, on respect and love that never demands you shrink to fit in. And if someone reading this or hearing it has ever endured cruelty because they were told family comes first, I want them to hear something louder. You're allowed to walk away. You are allowed to leave the table. To reclaim your place, not at someone else's expense, but at your own side. You're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to protect your children. You're allowed to say that was the last time. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone a seat at your table just because they share your last name. Eli's seat is now beside mine. His plate is full. His eyes sparkle when he laughs. His spirit is untouched by shame. And that is what family looks like. This is my story, not the one I dreamed I'd tell, but perhaps the one someone out there needs to hear. Maybe you're reading this and you've spent your whole life trying to fit in at a table that never made room for you. Maybe you've twisted yourself into something unrecognizable, hoping to belong in a room that always made you feel like an intruder. Maybe you've had to choose, like I did, between keeping the peace and protecting someone too small to defend themselves. If so, hear me now, you are not alone, and you are not wrong for walking away. If my story found its way into your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember their own strength. Let them know they're not crazy, not weak, not ungrateful. And if you find yourself craving stories like this, raw, unfiltered, honest in all their human messiness, then stay. Because in this space, we don't just tell stories.